wants to teach us to have smooth, clean lines on your applique and learn how to do it all yourself instead of having to commission it. We're going to have a step-by-step demonstration of satin stitch applique, and you can certainly ask questions from this fantastic artisan. Take it away.
Thank you. Now, if you want to commission it, I do take commissions, so I mean, you're good to do that too.
Yeah.
This is satin stitch applique. Now, applique, all applique means is putting one piece of fabric on top of another piece of fabric. That's all applique is. And though when people say you've appliqued something, we have now begun to identify that with satin stitch applique as the primary means. Satin stitch applique will look like this, with these beautiful, very, very solid lines of fabric. A good satin stitch applique will have no visible fabric underneath those lines. All the satin stitch is this thick, tiny zigzag stitch. It takes its name from a hand embroidery technique called satin stitch, which the design behind the hand embroidery technique was so that it would feel soft like satin when you put your finger against it. So I will not be doing hand embroidery. I will be doing machine satin stitch. And I will just be doing it on a cute little scrap of fabric. So to do good satin stitch, you'll need several tools. Of course, you will need your base fabric that your applique is going on top of. You will need your applique fabric. You will also need stabilizer, fusible interfacing. You can use non-fusible interfacing. It just makes life more challenging. I always use fusible interfacing. I usually do a medium weight. And you also need like a double-sided adhesive. I use Wonder Under. That's the name brand. There are others. I've used a few others. They are not half as good. So I recommend using Wonder Under, and all it is a fuse webbing that you pull away, and you won't be able to see it really well, but it's this fused like glue that they have on one side, and then it's paper on the next, and it's going to fuse your applique to your base material. You will also want fray check, and I'll show you why I use this in a little bit. Fray check is a name brand. It works very well. I like it a lot. You can use scissors, or I prefer using my rotary cutter. I have two sizes. I have a teeny size, and I also have a big size. I usually use my teeny size when I'm cutting out my applique itself. You may also find it handy to have a X-Acto blade of some kind to get those corners when you're cutting out your applique itself. I won't be using it today because I'm just doing a basic circle that I'm going to applique. And you'll need some way to draw your applique. I'll be using a water-soluble ink that will wash off when I wash it. You can use chalk. You can even use pins and markers. In theory, the thread should be thick enough over your lines that it won't be visible when you sew it. I usually don't trust theory, so I would use something that can be washed off later, such as a chalk or a water-soluble marker. So the first thing that we will be doing, we'll be marking our applique. All I'm going to be doing for today is just a basic circle on this pretty flower print because I didn't come up with anything more exciting. So if you want a beautiful circle, you would get something to not a tracer, a stencil or something of that kind to get the exact lines that you want, and then you'll use the stencil over it. I don't care that much for today, so I'm just going to be freehanding this beautiful little heart. And I'm just drawing a very bad circle all the way around it. If I cared, I would have a stencil, or I would get out my measuring and I would measure diameters all the way around and then draw arcs between my diameter marks to make sure it was a beautiful circle. I don't care that much, so this is what I have. I have a couple options at this point. You could cut out the circle, but then you'd have to mark the exact same circle on this piece of fabric, and you'd have to mark the exact same circle on this piece of fusible Wonder Wonder. I find life is easier if I make sure my iron's on. Yes. And I first fuse these pieces together onto my applique piece and cut them out afterward. This helps ensure that I have a very smooth circle that everything is layered on top of each other properly. When you're using any fusible material, so that's interfacing or Wonder, it can be handy to have a piece of scrap fabric on your ironing board just to make sure that you don't accidentally get any fuse on your cover of your ironing board, and then you have stickiness on your ironing board for forever and you have to live with it. But a good applique, a good satin-stitch applique will have several layers on it, like I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my applique material, it's my pretty rose, I place it right side down or face down on my ironing board. And then the next thing I have is I'm going to have my fusible interfacing. Again, I use medium weight usually. And I'm going to place it directly on top of my applique piece. Now my interfacing is bigger than my circle. And that's because I'll be cutting them all out together. So I want it to be slightly bigger than my circle to ensure that my entire circle has interfacing on it. The interfacing will just provide some more stability for it, so to make sure that your applique wouldn't lay nice and flat on your final product. So I get it. I usually use a high heat depending on how strong your iron is. And I mentally count till 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I remove it. And that's 89% of the time perfect. Yeah, and that worked well for mine. So you should see, you shouldn't be able to pull it up with your finger. It should be nice and flat. If you have an iron like I did for a while that gets ridiculously hot, you will want another piece of pressing cloth that you could put on top just to help protect it. Fusible interfacing will melt. It is a man-made material, so on a high enough heat, it will melt. So if you have an iron that gets too hot, you'll have to put another piece of pressing cloth on top of that. Otherwise, you'll have melted glue to your iron. So after I have my applique material, then I have my interfacing. Next thing you're going to iron on will be your Wonder or your fusible adhesive. So again, I'm putting that right on top of that section of applique. It's going just past my marked my applique section, so that when I cut it out, the entire applique will have fusible Wonder on it. Same thing, or I should say, paper side up, fusing side down. So same thing, my iron's on high, I put it down, I mentally count till 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Take it off. Make sure that it's not just peeling off right away, and it is not, so that is beautiful. So at this point, I have 3 layers on my applique. I have my applique material, I have my fusible interfacing, and I have my Wonder. And I'm going to go back to my cutting mat. Now that I have those 3 materials, I place it right side up so that I can see my applique circle, which I don't know if you guys can. There it is. And I take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut it out. So I'm pressing down and I'm just going around like that. And because it's a circle, I can move my fabric, but usually I say you are easier to move than your fabric. And I'm just cutting all the way Just like that. And now I have my applique cut out with its 3 things. And notice I don't have any pieces that are slightly too big. It's all one size exactly, just as it should be. This is when I use my fray check. And so what will happen if you don't use some kind of fray check is your applique, as you wash it and wear it, will pull away from the base fabric and it'll come out from under the stitches. So the fray check and a straight stitch that we'll put on before we do the satin stitch help prevent that. And it's just a really nice way to preserve the longevity of your satin stitch. So what sometimes happens with my fray check, if I haven't used it in a while, is it'll get clogged up in the bottle and I'll have to stick a hole with a needle like it's done today. So I just take my pin and I just stab it in there, take it back out, and that'll just provide a tunnel for my liquid to come out of. And you guys can't see what I'm doing. So I'm just putting it on the edge. Doesn't like me. I have to stab the hole again. I'm putting it on the edge of that applique. There we go. Just on that very edge. It should come out in this beautiful little line, like you were drawing a line with a liquid pin. And it's not cooperating because I haven't appliqued anything in a while. So I haven't used this bottle in a while, and it doesn't remember how to function. There we go. And it comes out in a lovely line, and it'll get the very edge of your applique wet, so it'll turn a slightly darker color. That's fine. Your satin stitch should cover that up. And if it doesn't, it should dry so you can't see it at all anyways. So that was just fray check, just all the way around the edges, and just absolutely a nice thing. And then you take the paper of your wonder off. So I just pinch the side a little bit, take my wonder, and the paper should just rip right off, just like that. So now if you feel it, it should feel have an odd kind of rubbery feeling to it. That's the adhesive waiting to be melted onto the base of your fabric that you're going to put your applique onto. Usually this will be your tunic or your pants. On another note, if you are putting your applique on a piece of garb, I highly recommend, if at all possible, to put it on before you do the construction of the garment. Because when you go to do the satin stitch, you'll be moving around less material. So when I appliqued the back of this, I first put the applique on the back, and then I attached the back to the front and the sleeves, rather than having my front and my top already combined, and then I'd have to be trying to not stitch through my top when I was doing my satin stitch, and it would have been a whole lot more inconvenient than just doing the satin stitch on the pattern piece before I put them all together. Today I will be using a very basic white piece of scrap fabric that will serve as the base for my applique. And I would just find the exact spot I wanted it to be. You know, if I'm doing this for a tunic, I would probably have a measuring out, and I'd be like, all right, I need it in the center, and I'd get out my measuring tool and be like, there's the center. I would chalk the line and then put the applique on that way. I don't care that much for this, and I think that looks like a lovely spot for my applique. So I'm just going to cut off that extra fabric so it's not in the way and take it to my ironing board. On my ironing board, I lay my base material down and I have my applique on top of it, exactly where I need it to be. Nice and flat and lovely. And I have the paper off of my wonder. So I have wrong side to right side, so I can see both right sides of the fabric. Take my iron, it's on high heat because I'm working with cottons, and I put it down and I usually mentally count till 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What you do not want to do is you don't want to do that. Because what that will do is there's a high chance that it'll move your material around underneath your iron, and then you're going to have a bunched applique. So you want to lay it flat, hold and press, lift it up, move it to your next section that you need to iron down, hold and press, lift it up, move it. Don't do this motion. You only do that when you're ironing clothes so they don't have wrinkles in them. So after I've ironed that, I have my applique. It should be ironed nice to my base material. I shouldn't be able to lift it up with my finger. If I really try, I can probably peel them apart, but I don't want to do that. And it's staying on there quite nicely. That was lovely. So now I have my applique, my stabilizer, my wonder, my base material. The last thing I'm going to need is, did I say, I meant interfacing. My applique interfacing wonder base material, and now I need stabilizer. Whenever I use stabilizer, I always just do a quick press, make sure that it is nice and smooth and flat and no wrinkles in it. Stabilizer will make your life so much easier. It acts like a thick piece of paper. Use those lots of different times. I use tearaway stabilizer, Pellon tearaway stabilizer. That's my favorite. I've also used cutaway stabilizer. It's not as nice. I mean, it's exactly what it is. You have to go and cut it away. I'd rather tear because then I'm not going to cut my fabric. There's washaway stabilizer. I use a lot of scraps because I do a lot of smaller appliques, so I prefer tearaway because washaway wouldn't give me any scraps. When you do your stabilizer, you want to cut it so it's larger than your applique. So if that's my applique, I'm going to cut it so that it goes past my applique at least an inch on each side if possible. It'll help make it feel like you're sewing on paper, not on fabric, which will allow for a much smoother satin stitch. So as you can see, it is an inch larger on both sides, but I'm actually going to put it behind my applique. So it's going to be applique, interfacing, wonder, base material, stabilizer on the back. After I have my stabilizer in, I usually, depending how big of a project I am, I will just pin my stabilizer in place. And I want to make sure it's super duper flat. I don't want any bunching. Nice, as flat as possible. No bunching of material. Always do this on a flat surface. Don't try and do this part in your lap. For something as small as this, and because I've been doing this a while, I might have skipped this stage, but I want to show you guys how to do it the right way. So we go around just like that. We have this lovely pinned section. If I'm doing a very large applique, I'm going to do a basting stitch just all the way around that applique so it holds the stabilizer in place. Because I'm just doing a small applique, I'm going to skip that step. But what I am going to do is a basic straight stitch right on the edge of my stabilizer. Just right. See how, I don't know if you guys can see how close he is, but the edge of my fabric is right there and my needle's there. So it's not even to the edge of my presser foot. It is as at that edge of the material, which is where my satin stitch will be. And I put my presser foot down, and you would go forward, and we're just going to do a basic straight stitch all the way around. And you want to do a back stitch or a securing stitch at your stop and your start. So I have just a very basic straight stitch to see how close it is to that material. That's exactly where I want it. What this will do is it'll help prevent your fabric from pulling away from the satin stitch, because the satin stitch is such a tight stitch. It'll sometimes try and pull it away. And if I've had friends come to me asking to fix the satin stitches because they've done exactly that. The applique pulled away from the stitch because of the hard juice it was getting on the fighting and the washing, and then it didn't have just the basic straight stitch or the no fray to kind of hold it in check. So that's one of the things I did when I went to fix them, was I added the no fray and a straight stitch to kind of just keep it there. The other nice thing is after you do that straight stitch, you can take out your pins and you don't have to worry about poking yourself. And I always trim my threads as I go, because I have found I would rather trim them as I go than do it all at the end. So now we have done all the prep work and we are ready for our actual satin stitch part. To get a good satin stitch, you will want a fancy press foot. So a basic presser foot is this. It's the A foot from a Viking Husqvarna, and it looks like this at the back. It's flat and smooth. That's the basic presser foot. What you will want will be Husqvarna Viking. It's a B. It looks the same on the front, but on the back it's got this groove, and that'll allow your thicker stitch to move through your machine a lot smoother. You can do it with the basic foot. It won't be as nice, and it's going to be much more challenging to move through than if you have a satin stitch foot. It's a lot nicer. I could tell the difference the first time I used it. It was amazing. Same thing with the first time I used stabilizer. You can tell the difference. It moves so much easier. On your machine, when you are setting for your satin stitch, you will want it on a zigzag setting. I gotta remember what I want. I'll do a 32. You will want it on a zigzag setting, and then you're going to want it as close as possible. So if you have an electronic machine, I do a 0.2. If you have a non-electronic machine, you have a manual machine, which is what I used for years. On my manual is you took the length of the stitch and you went back past the buttonhole until you saw the 0, and you were just in front of the 0. And you'll want to do some tests. So like if I was just here, oops, something's wrong with you. My machine didn't do what I wanted. How dare it? Well, yeah, you want the closeness of your stitch to be as tight as possible to get that clean satin look. So a 0.1, 0.2 if you have a electronic, or just before the 0 if you have a manual. And then you go and you always put down your needle first. because that's what you do when you're sewing. And it just helps make sure you're starting it where you want. Press the foot down, and then you go. And your goal should be that when your needle goes down on the edge of your material, it goes just past the edge of the patch, just right on the right-hand side of your applique.
Laeta,
yes.
move your camera a little bit to the left. There you go. Now you can see a little better.
Thank you.
You're at about 30 minutes. We don't have any questions or anything.
Sounds good. So your needles to go down just at the right-hand side of your applique, so it's on the base material, not on the applique itself. And then most of your stitch should be over the applique piece. So you want to keep that in mind when you're making the size of your applique, of how much applique fabric you'll need to have visible, because most of your stitch is going to be on your applique, not on the base material. And then your machine should be able to move it. The feed dogs in your machine should be able to move it just fine. You shouldn't have to push it much at all. And you just go nice and slow to begin with. So your only job is to move the fabric where you want it to be. So if you want to keep a straight line, your job is to keep it in a straight line. If you're doing a circle like I am right now, your job is to just keep that gradual circle so the fabric goes where it needs to be. And that's just practice. So as I'm getting to the end of my circle, I always overlap my satin stitch just a little bit to help secure it in place. And then I do a locking stitch or a back stitch to make sure that it's all going to stay in place. My satin stitch, again, I always trim my threads as I go. That's just my preference. It makes life easier. And then you should have a lovely satin stitch like this. You'll see some baby blue thread at the edge here. That's because my bobbin and my top thread are different colors. It's also an indication that my tension needs to be adjusted on my machine, because a properly adjusted tension when you do a satin stitch should all look like this. You shouldn't be able to see your bobbin thread at all. So the fact that I can see my bobbin thread there indicates to me that I need to adjust my tension and find out what's going on there. On the back, it should look like this, and you'll see the thread basically just went and cut through that stabilizer. So now I can just take it and I can just tear it off because it's tearaway stabilizer. If it wasn't, I'd have to cut it off or wash it off or however the instruction manual says. And I always do it for the inside of my applique and the outside because it'll affect how it hangs when it's done. But that is a satin stitch applique. You'll see I have a very, very tight stitch there because of how close it was, that 0.2 on my machine. So it was a very close zigzag stitch. And yeah, that is satin stitch applique. So if this was a tunic and this was the back of a tunic, I'd have my little patch on there. I could always take this white patch and then applique this patch onto something else as well. And you could have a double applique. That's all I got.
So I said I was just going to have you as background noise, but I actually was paying attention. It was super helpful. I learned some things.
The biggest thing, I believe this is Lady Armstrong. She did a satin stitch document. And I was given it by Cassius Apparel when I was an apprentice artificer, and it's a huge difference. And the biggest thing is that layering, because up until then I was just doing the applique material on the base fabric. And when you layer in the inner facing and the wando and the stabilizer, and you do the top stitch and you have the no fray, when you have all of those elements, that's what's going to make the really nice satin stitch. Up until then, it's going to be wonky. It's not going to lay flat on your material. It's going to be bunched up places. So when you have all those layerings, that's what allows it to have that really smooth finish. I use Pellon for my inner facing and wando and stabilizer. You can find them at Joann's.
Just like they did in the oldie times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with the hand stitch, hand embroidery satin stitch.
Well, fantastic. Any other questions?
No, then I'll go ahead and end the recording.
Thank you.